Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is. This is Left Side of the Aisle. I'm your host. My name's Larry Erickson, and for the next half hour or so, I'm going to be talking about some things that I think are worthy of your attention. Reactions to the show are always welcome. You can send them to me directly at my personal email. That is Whoviating, WHOVIATING at AOL.com. Or you can go to my website, which is called Lotus Surviving a Dark Time, and the URL will be over here somewhere during the show. You can look there. You can leave a comment there if you'd like, or you can get the email there if you missed it. If you do send me email, I have two requests. As always, one, please include something in the subject line and make it clear this is not spam, and be a little patient about getting an answer because I'm admittedly slow about my email. All right, so let's get to it. First off, a little bit of good news to start the week, just a little bit. Just that there apparently is still at least one way that you can stick it to the man, or at least make it clear that you're really pissed off with the man without getting in trouble. On September 14th, Federal District Judge Kathy Sibel ruled that writing nasty comments on your speeding ticket when you send it in to pay it is protected speech under the First Amendment, even if the comments are of the four-letter kind. William Barboza got a speeding ticket in the town of Liberty, New York in May of 2012. When he sent in the fine of $135, he must have been really clocking to get a fine that high, but no matter. When he sent in the fine for $135, he crossed off the town's name Liberty on the form, wrote in tyranny, and below that wrote, and I really would like to quote this in full, and this being public access, I could probably get away with it, but I'm not going to. I don't really want to. So this is, you'll get the idea. He wrote, "F your blankety town, bitches." That September, Justice Brian Rourke told Barboza that his payment had been rejected and he'd have to appear in court. When he got there, Rourke lectured Barboza over his choice of language, and a prosecutor from the county DA's office told two police there to arrest Barboza on a charge of aggravated assault. He was arrested. Aggravated harassment. Make sure I'm correct about that. He was arrested, booked, fingerprinted, handcuffed to a bench. After being shuffled around among some courts, he was finally released on a bail of $200. The next year, a different judge dismissed the charges, saying the language he used was so clearly protected it wasn't even necessary to cite case law. So Barboza sued the town, and Judge Sibel has now ruled that the town clearly misapplied the aggravated harassment statute, and that Barboza's arrest, quoting, violated his clearly established constitutional right to engage in and be free from arrests because of protected speech, which leaves the town and the prosecutor on the hook for damages. So I say good for Judge Sibel, who apparently is someone who remembers that old basic legal principle that free speech rocks. All right, next up, I intended to step away from this circus for a while, but I'll give a pretty quick update on events. Kim Davis went back to work on Monday, and aren't we all excited? As she did, she said she would not interfere with her deputy clerks issuing marriage licenses to same-sex couples, and indeed at least one such license was issued on that day. However, what she did do was to order her staff to change the template for the forms, removing her name and title from the license form and substituting, quote, pursuant to federal court order. Then, having changed by fiat a government form, a state form, I assume on God's authority, she grandly declared that she had grave concerns about the legal validity of licenses issued the way she designed the form. Now, the governor of Kentucky says these forms are valid, these licenses are valid, and will be recognized as such in the state. The state attorney general says they're valid. The county attorneys say they're valid. But Davis and her lawyers, who I almost called her mouthpieces, but the truth of it is that she is more their mouthpiece than they are hers. They claim otherwise. They say they're not valid. And I wonder now if ultimately this is how Davis and her posse of supporters are going to console themselves, telling themselves that, well, you know, those people, they're they're not really married, you know. Meanwhile, Davis keeps right on losing in court over and over, to the point where her lawyers were saying it was good for Kim Davis that one of her suits was not dismissed outright, which is kind of like somebody going 0 for 4 and then saying, yeah, hey, remember that really long foul I hit in the 5th inning? More on this if and when there's something worth noting. On another more serious topic, 2 weeks ago, I talked about the proposed peace deal to end the civil war in the world's youngest nation, South Sudan. At that time, I said if I can get back the following week without having to note a significant renewal of fighting or a breakdown of the frankly tenuous peace accord, that we could at least hope that the people of South Sudan would at least have enough of a respite to bury their dead. Well, it's been 2 weeks, and I can say there has been no renewal of large-scale fighting. There's been sporadic fighting in various parts of the country, enough to prompt the United Nations Security Council to say that it could impose sanctions if the deal breaks down. And it was to a fair extent the threat of such sanctions that has gotten this peace process, if you can call it that, as far as it has. Now, whether or not such a threat keeps events on track, that's open to debate. A lot of people, both observers and people in South Sudan, are doubtful that this agreement will fare any better than the 7 ceasefires that predated it. On the other hand, many of those ceasefires broke down literally within hours, and this one has lasted, at least in terms of widespread large-scale fighting, over 2 weeks now, which is clearly not long enough to declare this any kind of success, but perhaps is long enough to blunt some of the harshest cynicism. Both sides now have ratified the agreement which their leaders had signed. South Sudan's parliament did it on September 10th, the rebels' governing council the next day, which is good. And each side says it believes the other side has no intention of living up to the accord, which is bad. But still, it appears at the same time that neither side wants to be the one that could be blamed for the thing breaking down, which actually in its way is good. The civil war in South Sudan broke out in December 2013 after the failure of what amounted to an ethnic coalition government headed by still President Salva Kiir, a member of the dominant Dinka group in the country, and then Vice President and now rebel leader Riek Machar, who is an ethnic Nuer. Long-standing rivalries and conflicts between those two closely related ethnic groups are central to the overall conflict in South Sudan, and the oldness, the ancientness, if you will, of these conflicts is one of the things that makes people cynical about the future. But that future, if nothing is resolved, promises to be a really bleak one. Unknown tens of thousands of people have been killed in South Sudan in the fighting, and the UN's Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says that 2.2 million people in South Sudan have been displaced from their homes out of a population of 12.5 million. And that over 4.5 million, over a third of the population, are severely food insecure, meaning they are at risk of famine with all that entails. Meanwhile, President Kiir is engaging in worsening repression, particularly on the press, which is under fire, often enough literally. His information minister, one Michael McQuay, even warned that any journalist who quoted rebels in reporting on the war would be considered a rebel themselves and subject to the same penalties. For myself, I keep looking at the fact that a ceasefire in South Sudan has more or less held for over 2 weeks now, in order to build up and hold on to some hope. But I have to admit, at the end of it all, that reality is still a very harsh master. All right, now, this week is unusual in one way, in that the Clown Award given as always for meritorious stupidity, and the outrage of the week are actually linked. They are two parts of the same story. The attempts by the right wing to continue and expand their war on reproductive rights by destroying Planned Parenthood. We'll take the Clown Award first because this is almost comical. And this week, the big red nose goes to Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal. Now, Jindal is one of several GOPpers who dream of collecting the support of the fanatical right wing with the idea that it will propel them through the GOPper presidential primaries. In his case, he tried to show his wacko bona fides by moving to cut off $730,000 in Medicaid reimbursements to the state's two Planned Parenthood clinics. Now, this was supposedly in response to those heavily edited, widely circulated, and now widely debunked videos purporting to show Planned Parenthood selling fetal parts, which is illegal. But, of course, that was the excuse, not the reason. Planned Parenthood, not surprisingly, sued over his attempt to cancel their contract. The case is now before a federal court. A question in the case is who would step in to provide the services now provided by Planned Parenthood if that organization is boxed out. Bear in mind that in 2014 in Louisiana, Planned Parenthood delivered well over 10,000 services to thousands of patients, services overwhelmingly provided to low-income women on Medicaid. Replacing the loss of those services would be a major undertaking. Well, the answer to that question, the state of Louisiana provided to the court a list of over 2,000 actually, family planning providers in the state ready to accept new patients. Unfortunately for the state of Louisiana, the judge in the case, one John DeGravelis, actually looked at the list. And he found it included hundreds of entries for specialists such as ophthalmologists, nursing home caregivers, dentists, ear, nose, and throat doctors, and even cosmetic surgeons, a list the judge found extremely odd. So the state started over and came back with a revised list of healthcare providers in Louisiana ready to take up the banner of Planned Parenthood's patients. The total was 29. And even that list is questionable. In Baton Rouge, the state lists 5 alternative providers, but only 3 of those offer contraceptive services, and 2 of those have waits of up to 7 weeks. One of those 5 is not accepting any new patients for STI, breast cancer, or cervical cancer screenings, all of which are services now offered by Planned Parenthood in the city. You know, if only dentists offered contraception and plastic surgeons could do pap smears, by gosh, then we'd have Planned Parenthood right where we want them. Bobby Jindal, hopeless loser in the GOPper presidential race and thoroughgoing clown. Which in turn brings us to the outrage of the week. It's been clear for some time, as I said just a couple of minutes ago, that the attacks on Planned Parenthood are ultimately about expanding the right wing's war on reproductive rights. That determination is so strong that in Florida, Governor Voldemort, who would use the excuse of those bogus videos to order an investigation of Planned Parenthood, actually stripped out a sentence from the press release saying the investigation had exonerated Planned Parenthood, and replacing it with one saying that physicians who worked at the clinics were going to be referred to the State Board of Medicine for possible disciplinary action. But it's the GOPpers in Congress, especially in the House, who don't just cross the line, they obliterate the concept there was even a line to cross. The drooling delight with which they greeted the lying videos told anyone with eyes and ears that their long-standing enmity toward Planned Parenthood had nothing to do with an agenda of protecting women's health or any of the rest of that crap, but an agenda of turning the clock back on reproductive rights and the roles of women in society. But these videos, now they had their weapon, their glorious sword to slay the demon of Planned Parenthood. All this illegality, all this crime, illegally profiting from the sale of fetal tissue, horrifying, shut them down. We'll have congressional investigations. We'll expose the horror. But there was a problem. The videos kept getting debunked. Their so-called proof built entirely on deceptive and selective editing, in other words, on lies, and their claims repeatedly proved to be vapor. And as each new one came out, it got less and less media attention, and the debunking came faster. And those investigations? 6 states and 3 congressional committees witch hunted Planned Parenthood, only to wind up having to admit, without exception, that there was nothing illegal about Planned Parenthood's operations. Even some GOPpers had to admit that the attempt to find something illegal or criminal had failed. So what are the GOPpers to do? Sour grapes. The issue is not whether there's been a crime committed or not, said one. The issue is whether or not taxpayers should fund Planned Parenthood. That's the issue before this committee. That is, no, it's no longer about the videos. In fact, it never was about the videos. It's like, what videos? What are you talking about? It was never about illegality, and how dare you suggest otherwise? The willingness of these people to just ignore all their previous pious posturing and now come on as if all of that was irrelevant, never actually mattered in the first place. It's breathtaking in its transparent hypocrisy. Hypocrisy in service of denying poor women access to health care. That is an outrage, and we are taking a break. And here we are back. I said last week that despite all the fear-mongering and hoopla about a war on police, hoopla that according to a new Rasmussen poll has 58% of likely U.S. voters believing it, the hard fact is that 2015 is shaping up to be safer for police than 2014, which is already at an historically low level, although admittedly not the lowest. In fact, I've learned in the past couple of days that 2015 is shaping up to be one of the safest years for police anytime in the past 150 years, at least with regard to gun violence. And that's whether you measure it by the total number of police fatalities or police fatalities as a proportion of the total population. And if you measure it by proportion, police fatalities as a portion of the number of police officers, over the last 25 years, the trend has been dramatically down to the point where it's now at a rate just slightly above a quarter of what it was in 1990. But what I wanted to address here in a way is the other side of that reality. The one that says, as of September 15th, 842 people have been killed by police this year, a pace pointing to an all-time high of 1,200 people killed by police by the end of 2015. This, again, at a time when killing of police by guns is, well, it's nearly at an all-time low. Those numbers give reason to embrace the notion that cops have become trigger happy, ready to shoot to kill at the very first wrong twitch of the person they are facing. But I actually suggested an alternative explanation to trigger happy back in February when I said, and I'm quoting myself here, I've just been wondering, are cops nowadays taught to be scared? Are they trained to spend every moment of their working days in mortal fear of their lives? No joke, no sarcasm. I'm serious. I genuinely wonder. See, I noted that a lot of the videos which we had seen of ugly confrontations between police and others, the cops involved seemed to me to be, and I'm quoting myself again here, genuinely frightened to the point of struggling to control themselves and stay calm, or sadly, and often enough tragically, acting impulsively and irrationally and violently. So I wondered then, are they cops being trained to be scared? Well, now I have my answer, and it's yes, they are. An Iraqi war veteran, a former MP, is now attending a police academy with the goal of increasing his chances for a civilian career in law enforcement. Under the pseudonym Clayton Jenkins, he wrote an op-ed for the Daily Beast in which he says, I'm quoting, "What are they telling us in a post-Michael Brown academy? The culture of police brutality is infrequently addressed, but what is continually mentioned is the notion that there is a war on police. He says some instructors blame Barack Obama. Some blame Black Lives Matter. But the point is, yes, police are being told specifically that by being cops, they are entering a war zone. They're being taught that their lives are perpetually at imminent risk. Now add that to the infamous 21-foot rule still being used in a lot of police academies that in essence tells cops that anyone within 21 feet of them could potentially kill them before they could get their gun out. And you have a perfect recipe for an entire nation of police forces ready to shoot down in an instant if someone gestures the wrong way. Scared people with guns. This is not a good combination. In a way related to this, you'll see how the relation is. Last week, Camilla Brock gave her first on-air interview about what she called the nightmare she was put through by the New York Police Department, a nightmare that has caused her to sue the city. It began on the night of September 12, 2014, when she was stopped at a traffic light in Harlem with her car stereo playing loudly. A cop approached her and asked her why she was driving without her hands on the steering wheel. She replied, this is all according to her suit, she replied that I'm stopped at a light and I'm dancing to the music. Now, the cop, who was unidentified in the suit, told her to get out of the car, and she was, for reasons she says are unclear, brought to the 30th Precinct Police Station, where she was held for a few hours before being released without charge, and was told she could come back the next day to get her car, which was, by the way, a 2003 BMW 325 Ci. Now, I'm going to make a quick detour here to note that one of the places that wrote about this was autoblog.com, which clearly, obviously, is mostly interested in like cars and driving. Now, I always say, though, that the place where you can really see the darkness of the soul of our community is not in the articles, but in the comments. And there the comments were chock-a-block with things like, there's more to this, or we're not being told the whole story, and the like, almost exclusively revolving around the claim that a 12-year-old BMW is not a luxury car. One even called it a clunker. And so, how could this possibly be a big deal? That is because the car was not a new top-of-the-line model, which she never said it was. Either the media that reported this or the woman herself must be lying in order to make everything about race. All right, back to our story. When Brock went to get her car, this is when it got really bad. She said, I just felt like from the moment I said I owned a BMW, I was looked at as a liar. The cops told her they had to handcuff her to take her to her car, which he thought was weird, but thought, I don't know, and anything to just get my car back. Then emergency medical services shows up, telling her they're going to take her to her car in an ambulance. Yeah, sure they were. Instead, they took her to Harlem Hospital, where she was forcibly sedated and stripped of her clothing. The beginning of 8 hellish days in that hospital, being regarded as delusional and bipolar, despite the lack of any history of mental illness. During that time, according to medical records obtained by her attorney, she was injected with powerful sedatives and forced to take doses of lithium. Those same medical records, also show personnel at the hospital repeatedly told Brooks that to get released, she had to admit to 3 things. 1, she doesn't own a BMW. 2, she isn't a professional banker. And 3, Barack Obama does not follow her on Twitter. Except the BMW is hers, she is a professional banker, and Barack Obama does follow her on Twitter. Now, he actually follows 640,000 people, so it's unlikely he personally reads her tweets, but technically, yes, he does follow her. To add insult to injury, after she was finally able to get out of the hospital after being confined involuntarily, she was hit with a bill of $13,000. The city's legal brief in response to her suit tried to justify her forcible commitment to a mental ward by claiming she was, quote, acting irrational, she spoke incoherently and inconsistently, and she ran into the middle of traffic on 8th Avenue during her initial encounter with the police. Now, they said, therefore, she presented a risk to herself or others. Now, leaving aside the great likelihood of some fair amount of hyperbole in that, it does raise the question, if that was the issue, why was she released and told to come back the next day instead of EMS being called right away? This all seems to end up right back where it began. Camilla Brock spent 8 hellish days being pumped full of sedatives and regarded as mentally ill because the NYPD could not believe that a black woman could own a BMW, even an old one. The single best comment on this whole mess was this one, I'm quoting, "This is one of those times where I almost hope she's the one in the wrong, because if she's right, we really do have inmates running the asylum, and these inmates have badges." And I would add, and guns. I'm going to finish up here. Those two stories together got me thinking about something that happened several years ago. I was driving, and I got stopped by a cop. And he came to the window, and one of those, do you know why I stopped you things? And I honestly didn't know. And he said, "Oh, you have a headlight out." I said, "Oh, hang on a minute." And I leaned over, opened my glove compartment, and pulled out a new headlight bulb. And these kind of bulbs, they were sort of tubular bulbs and fairly large, and of course it was still in the package, which made it look even larger. And I took it out and I showed it to him, and I said, "I discovered the light last night, I bought this today, it's going to be in tomorrow." All of which was true. And he said, "Okay," and that was the end of it. What has occurred to me later, in more recent times, thinking back about this, is wondering, if the circumstances are identical, everything, the words, the actions, the time, everything identical, except for one thing. Instead of being an overweight, middle-aged white guy, I was a young black male. Would I still be alive? Or would I be one of those tragic accidents, unfortunate tragedies, and shot to death in the driver's seat of my car, an unarmed young black man, because some cop thought I was reaching for a gun? Just imagine, a young black male. Cop comes up to the window, and that young black male reaches over for his glove compartment and pulls something out of it. Now maybe this cop would have reacted exactly the same way he did. He would have waited to see what it was and said, "Okay, you're fine." Maybe he would. But the very fact that we can look at that situation and really imagine that, yes, this would have been another statistic, that if I had been a young black man instead of a middle-aged white guy, that I'd be dead, tells us how much still needs to change. Tells us how much still needs to be done. All right, I'm just going to stop there. I'm going to tell you that we'll be back next week. In the meantime, you have the best week you possibly can. And for now, as always, peace.